Mark wrote in his journal that things are a mess. The past month for him has been dark, and he's been keeping his wife at a distance. He's not praying like before. He skipped 2 prayer meetings with some other men, and today has been tiring. He hasn't stopped from the moment he left home. And as an optometrist, he had to tell 2 people today that they are likely to lose their sight. And one got very angry. She left saying she would find another doctor. And because of all this, Mark left the family dinner as soon as he reasonably could. So Mark is having a very dark month. It might sound like the lives of a lot of us. And I kind of hope you're having a very bad time today so that this homily will make sense. Just kidding. St. Ignatius of Loyola, he has 14 rules of discernment in his spiritual exercises for the first week. The rules of discernment are basically 14 guidelines explaining how the devil works on our soul and how God also works on the soul and how you should respond. So these rules of discernment are amazing. They're universally practical, and they've helped millions of people's lives. So today we're going to cover rules 4 and 5. And our jumping off point for rule 4 is what Jesus says. Be on guard, so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly like a trap. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man. So what is Jesus saying here? He's saying that there are going to be experiences in your life that will distract you from him. And he gives 3 examples. The first one, dissipation. In Greek, the original language, dissipation literally means drinking bout. So we're talking about a partying lifestyle, a life far from God, a life of superficiality. That's going to distract us from God. Second, drunkenness. Now, we've talked about before, drunkenness is what we call grave matter for sin. So if I knowingly, consciously choose to drink to the point that I get drunk, that's a mortal sin. Why? Because I'm intentionally choosing to lose my ability to reason and therefore my ability to love. Now, we all as Catholics know drinking is not a sin. But if you choose to drink to the point of drunkenness, that separates us from God. So we want to stay away from that. And finally, the worries of this life. Interesting, the worries of this life, quite often, they're really minor, and they're often not very sinful, or maybe they're not even sinful at all, but they're really big distractions. And what is Jesus saying? He's telling us, be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down. Be alert at all times. So think about it this way. If you have 2 men, they're both having bad months, and they both have the exact same problems. Work is terrible, they've lost their peace, they feel far from God, and let's say they're both struggling with pornography. How much of an advantage would one man have if he recognized what was going on inside his heart? Just to recognize, he'd have a huge advantage. So the 4th rule of discernment, St. Ignatius, he gives a description. This is what he says. Desolation includes darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disquiet from various agitations and temptations, moving to lack of confidence, without hope, without love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, and as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. A few things to keep in mind. There's no shame in experiencing these desolations. So even the saints, all of us, will experience these things. Another thing, these desolations affect all people, not just Christians, okay? So it affects everyone. If you've got a soul, you're going to experience this. And finally, desolation, you'll notice here in the description, it's more in the realm of our feelings. Now, desolation can also happen in our thoughts, but it's predominantly in the feelings. Why is that important? We've talked about many times before, pay attention to your feelings. but don't be guided by them. Now, our feelings can tell us very important things. It can tell us, for example, I don't feel safe. I felt humiliated. But sometimes our feelings can be wrong. They can tell us things that aren't true. So we need to verify if our feelings are telling us the truth. So I'll give you an example. Let's say a guy says to me, I can't stand work. The people at my work are so arrogant, they drive me nuts. I feel so far away from God. And then I will probe and I'll say, okay, so what did you do if they're so arrogant? And you'll say, well, I was calm, but I told them what they were doing wrong. And they didn't even listen. And then I'll say, based on what you've just said, I know you feel like you're far from God. It doesn't sound like you're far from God. Well, why? How do you know, Father Justin? Because based on what you said you stayed calm, you had courage to speak up, and you haven't sinned yet, from what I can tell. That's a sign you're close to God. You might feel like you're far from God, but you're not. So we usually equate having a good week with being close to God. That's not necessarily the case. So let's say you're in real physical pain. Let's say you're sick. And let's say your mom's in the hospital and you feel so far away from God. And then I will probe you. I'll say, do you trust in God? Yes. Do you hope in Him? Do you love Him? Yes. Are you trying to be like Jesus? Yeah. Then you're actually very close to God, but you're having a really tough week. On the other hand, let's say you're having just an awesome month. Work is going really well. You're going to all your favorite restaurants. You're watching some great stuff on Netflix. And then I say to you, tell me about your prayer lately. It's okay? Have you done anything spiritual lately? No. Do you have any desire to do anything spiritual? Not really. It sounds actually like you're in desolation. You're having a great month, but your heart is far from God. You know, last week when we did the Christ the King challenge, I just want to affirm those of you who chose not to raise your hand. Why? Because you answered honestly. That's a very good thing. And I don't know if any of you are experiencing this, but I just want to warn you of a potential desolation. You might say to yourself, well, I didn't raise my hand. I feel badly. No, there's no reason to be discouraged about that. So just be careful about that desolation. So the gift of Rule 4 is recognize what's happening to you. Jesus says, be on guard, be alert. Okay. Now our jumping off point for Rule 5, Jesus says, now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads because your redemption is drawing near. When you're in spiritual desolation, be like a rock, okay? Be very firm. Now, St. Ignatius, Spanish saint, he wrote all of his stuff in Spanish. So let's put Rule 5 up there in Spanish because I want you to understand the nuance of what he said. He said, en tiempo de desolación nunca ser cambio. Now, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, he's saying, in time of desolation, don't do anything epically stupid. Don't be a mucho fool. Now, a more literal translation would be, in time of desolation, never make a change, but be firm and constant in the proposals and determination in which one was the day preceding such desolation. The example I gave you of that person, Mark, having the really bad month, Mark, when he's in spiritual desolation, should not keep his wife at a distance. He should not skip his family dinner. On the contrary, when he's in desolation, he must proceed like he was before, when he was in consolation. He has to keep on praying like he was. He has to keep on going to those prayer meetings with his other friends. Give you another example. Let's say you're doing really well spiritually and you're like, I'm going to go to confession once a month. Good. And then you make a really big mistake and you say, I don't want to go. Should you go to confession? Yes or no? Yeah. Because when you're in consolation before, that's what you chose. Now you're in desolation, don't change. You know how a lot of people hear about scandals in the church They hear about horrible things Catholics did in residential schools. They hear about sex abuse by priests. And they get so mad, which is justified, but they get so mad they stop going to Mass. They're violating Rule 5. Because they're in desolation, don't make a change. So if ever you're in desolation, don't change your prayer. Don't skip it, I mean. Don't skip Alpha. Don't skip faith studies. But this does not apply to non-spiritual desolation. This rule only applies when you're in spiritual desolation. So let's make a distinction. When you're in non-spiritual desolation, let's say you're really tired. If you're really physically tired, go sleep. Make a change. Let's try another one. Let's say you've had a super busy day and you get home and your kids need you and you're thinking, should I skip Alpha? Before we answer, we're going to ask the question, are you in spiritual desolation? So I would ask a question. Tell me about how close do you feel to God? I love him. Okay, if that's the case, skip Alpha and go help your kids because you're in consolation. And finally, let's say you're in an unhealthy relationship, like a romantic relationship, but it's unhealthy. That's not spiritual, that's non-spiritual. If that's the case, make a change. You might need to break up, you might need to protect yourself. A few weeks ago when I was meditating on these readings for today, I was praying over them and I was thinking about skipping this annual 1102 prayer initiative. So we've been doing this every Advent since 2018. And when I was praying, I was thinking, I don't know if we should do it this year. I don't think I think a lot of people are going to fill this out and then they're not going to do the second part. They're not going to invite anyone, let's say, to Alpha. So I thought maybe we shouldn't do it. And then I kept on being aware. I don't have a lot of trust in God at that moment. And as soon as I recognized that, Rule 5 says, if you're in spiritual desolation, don't make a change. And I was in desolation because my trust in God was very weak. That's when I knew we're going to push ahead with this because the devil didn't want us to push ahead. So could I ask you all right now, could you pull these out, please? They're in front of you. Could everyone pull out one for each person, please? These 1102 prayer cards come from Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, verse 2. And so what it is in that verse, the disciples say to Jesus, teach us how to pray. And he says, pray the Our Father. So every year since 2018, we write down names of the people we love that we would just hope that they would come to know Jesus and receive that fullness of life. So you write down their names on both sides, same names on both sides. And then every day at 11:02 a.m. or p.m., you pray for them. So you've got to set an alarm on your phone, that reminder. And you choose whether you do the big side or the small side. One of these sides will go into the basket. Some people keep the small one. They keep it like I'll put it in my phone case. Other people will take the big one home and put it on their refrigerator, so you choose. We're going to take one of the halves of the cards, put it in the basket right there, and then after communion, the altar servers will put it underneath the altar. And that comes from the book of Revelation, because it says in Revelation that the souls of the martyrs were underneath the altar. And that's going to be a sign we're bringing our loved ones close to Jesus' sacrifice. Now, also, I forgot, notice the prayer example on the back of the card. That just gives you a very simple thing you can offer for your loved ones. So we'll have about a minute or two after the homily to fill this out. We'll need time. Start praying. Jesus, who are the people I should be praying for? I'm going to pray for them every day at 11:02 a.m. or p.m. And we'll have the rest of the Mass to fill it out. So take your time. I still haven't finished my card. And don't forget, bring it up during communion. So you'll have the rest of the Mass to do it. Father Timothy Gallagher, he writes extensively on these rules of discernment. He always says this, if you forget anything I've said, please don't forget Rule 5. When you're in spiritual desolation, don't make a change. Because if you understand Rule 5, that will get you through a lot of darkness in your life. So, just to repeat, Rule 4 says recognize when you're in desolation. Rule 5 says deflect it. Don't make a change. And if you do, then you will be able to stand up and raise your heads when Jesus comes. So now we can start filling out our cards. Thank you.